This is the Fox Business Network. Our motto is that we give you the power to prosper. Well, we do. We give you information, and you're free to take that information, and we hope you'll prosper with it. Maybe you'll start a company that'll create jobs. It is companies, private companies, that do that. And yet, when I ask people outside the studio what they want their government to do, people said things like this.
More jobs.
Yes.
More jobs.
Why would they think government can create jobs? Partly because politicians tell them that.
My job is to create jobs.
President Obama was a job creator from day one.
It's a plan that will trigger the creation of millions of new jobs for Americans.
What hubris! Politicians don't create jobs. Government has no money of its own. All government can do is take from one group of people and give it to another. That creates jobs over here, but the money taken from the private economy means the private sector has then less to create with. Yaron Brook, you're nodding. I think that means you agree with me. That's Yaron Brook of the Ayn Rand Institute. But David Callahan, our second guest tonight from the progressive group Demos, says Brook and I are just wrong. So we're wrong. Government can spend and create jobs?
Well, government certainly can spend and create jobs. I mean, the problem we have right now, John, is that consumers don't have the money to buy stuff, which means that corporations and businesses aren't hiring. It's not that corporations don't have enough money. They're sitting on record profits. They have lots of cash. They're not hiring because there's not consumer demand.
So if you give them stuff, doesn't that take it from these people?
Look, if government steps up, provide stimulus money to hire people, what we'll get is more people spending money in this economy, more hiring, and we get that virtuous cycle going. We're not talking about permanent government job creation. We're talking about stimulus kickstarting this economy.
That Keynesian catalyst.
Yeah, it's
Keynesian
ridiculous to
catalyst.
assume that you can tax the people that are actually working and give the money to people who are not working, and somehow this creates economic activity. You're destroying as much by taking from those that are productive, that are working, that are creating. Much more
He
you're
says these
destroying than
companies are
anything you
sitting
would
on the
create.
money.
They are sitting on the money, and that's the real question. And I agree. I mean, the economy's a mess. People are not consuming, but more importantly, people are not producing. They're not investing. And the real question is, why? And that's what we need to solve, is why are businesses sitting on the money? And they're sitting on the money because they're worried about what government is going to do tomorrow. They're worried about taxes going up. They're worried about the piles and piles of regulation.
Well, that's why I have all this stuff
today.
around here, that my prop, that these boxes, 80,000 pages, are what were added to the Federal Register just this year. Every day, the bureaucracy comes out with another book like this.
If you ask businesses why they're not hiring, they don't point to regulation, they don't point to uncertainty, they don't point to high taxes. What they point to is the lack of consumer demand. We've got to get out of this trough
This is, again, a Keynesian fallacy. The Keynesian fallacy is that economy is driven by consumers. Economy is not driven by consumers. When people have jobs, when they're comfortable about the future, they buy stuff. The economy is driven by production, by creating stuff, by building stuff. When businesses invest, they buy stuff, they consume. That's what really powers an economy. If we can get businesses confident in the future of the U.S. economy, they will start investing. And the only way to do that is to get government off their backs.
And if you're running a business and you're looking at all this that you have to understand or you might go to jail, wouldn't that deter you from expanding?
Excuse me, but, you know, in 2007, we had 4.6% unemployment, and there's not been that much new regulation since then. I mean, what happened?
This is just 1 year. There's been lots of new regulations
Unemployment,
since then.
John, unemployment went from 4.6% to 9% practically overnight. It was not because of an explosion of regulation. It was because
of a bubble burst.
It was because of a financial crisis caused in part by deregulation, not enough cops on Wall Street to crack down on that casino.
It's that pile of regulation, and much, much bigger, because we're talking about all the regulations since the 30s to today, that caused this financial crisis, that created the mess that we're in. Yes, you can take a point in history and say there are lots of regulations and unemployment's low, but at the same time, these same regulations are building up this bubble, the Freddie and Fannies of the world, the way banks were regulated. This is a crisis of too much government, too much regulations.
I agree.
I'm with you.
All right.
But here's a place where one place where we certainly need more government spending is in the area of infrastructure. Drive down any road, go across any bridge, you're likely to see dilapidation. There was a bipartisan panel that said that we need to spend about $2 trillion more on our infrastructure.
All right, you're right. That sounds good. That's a role for
China's
government.
putting money into
Interstate
high-speed
highway
rail,
system.
Fine. Don't pretend that stimulates the economy, though. Look, that money has to come from somewhere. That $2 trillion that you, or much more than $2 trillion that you would want to spend on this infrastructure, again, is taken from the private economy, is destroying investment and jobs in the private economy.
This is a fallacy, this notion that taking money from the private sector doesn't create jobs. 20 million jobs were created in the 1990s when we had higher tax rates than we do today. After World War II, also a period of high tax rates, we had incredible job growth.
Something like an earthquake or a tornado, does that stimulate the economy? By Keynesian logic?
I mean, World War II is the great stimulus of all time, right? A cataclysmic war. Nobody wants that. But the point is that that kind of external crisis can, in fact, inject a lot of new capital into the economy.
So Hurricane Irene might cause a boom?
Well, they say that it will increase GDP in the last 2 quarters of 2011. That's not good, but that's an example of how when you have new...
Somebody reliable says that?
When you...
Look, this is one of the worst fallacies in economics. This is called the broken window fallacy. It's the notion that you give a thug a rock and he throws it into the baker's window and he shatters the window. This is great. Economic
Creates a job for a glassmaker.
Exactly. But of course, what has it done? It's taken the hard-earned savings of the baker, who would have maybe put in another furnace or given it to the bank, which would have lent it and created economic activity elsewhere. And instead, we're replacing a window we had before. That's not economic growth. World War II did nothing, absolutely nothing, to promote economic growth. It is not war. Breaking things, blowing buildings up, breaking glass is not an economic stimulus. Destruction doesn't lead to progress.
Well, likewise, wealth is not created by individuals. Wealth is created in a society with universities, with infrastructure, with scientific investment, often by government, with laws and regulations. This notion that prosperity is created in some vacuum of individual striving is just wrong, Iran. China, Europe, they're spending money on high-speed rail. They're investing in the technologies of tomorrow.
It's just
going to
be wonderful. I gave you the last word. I hate to give the progressive the last word, but we're out of time. Thank you. David, and you're on.